So this is interesting because this is right um, up your like expertise, Scott. So for example, we also kind of knew that you need to build great processes and everything, but as I said, like after 2022, we all had to do a lot of hard work. Um, so for example, today after implementing some of these processes, after using our own AI tool, we have been able to increase our meeting output by at least 2.5x with the same team.
That's
And
amazing.
for example, reps who were very good at calls, but we're not getting meetings through emails and LinkedIn are now getting more meetings through other channels,
Right.
people, and vice versa, right? So we understand that this thing works. It's not that, if you just do this and still you don't see results, it's not going to happen. So would love to know more about, your thought process on this. How do you consult your customers about, building these processes?
So, okay, so our process is a little bit different because we have like, so I'll address this thing briefly, and then I'll talk a little bit about our process and how we think about this. So I think to me, this is really the smart way to use AI is you figure out like no chat GPT prompt is going to magically save your quota, right?
Yeah.
What could happen is you can figure out a process that might take you, an hour reading a 10K. Like I'm a little bit weird because, I read extraordinarily fast. So I can skim a 10K in like 5 minutes and I did that yesterday and pull meaningful inputs out. But actually, that was an investor call, but beside the point. So you take a 10K, you upload it to Chat GPT. This is what the best sellers were doing already. You're just like, okay, how can I take this and what inputs am I looking out of it? So I think the real application, in a weird way, it's like the way to win an AI is not to focus on AI. It's okay, how do I clearly define my process? Who's crushing it at this one process? And then how can I like do 80% of what they're doing, like get close to the output they're getting, but do it in way less time using AI. Like, is there a prompt I can do? And eventually those prompts and those inputs will become AI startups in many cases.
Got it. Um, any
Answer,
question? Yeah, yeah, sorry.
the final question, what we kind of do, I kind of have the way I kind of look at Outbound is I've tried to find the critical path of like, what exactly do I need to do in order to get a functioning engine? And that for us, that typically starts with customer analysis, like who's actually paying you money, how much, what attributes do they have in common? So things we look at, technographics, job titles, departments, maybe we should probably be looking at geography, things like that. And we will also look at industry and department headcounts. So for instance, for one customer, we realized, like 95% of their highest billing customers used Atlassian Cloud. They had at least 10 sales reps, a product role, and a consulting role. So we turned that into a search filter, and that's what I call like the retainable addressable market. So we take that data, and then what we want to do is we want to sanity check it against, okay, who do you think your ICP is? For instance, we had another customer. They're like, oh, well, finance is one of our titles. And then we looked at, okay, that's good in theory. Let's look at all of the titles actually involved with your existing deals. I was like, guys, like 10 or 20% of your deals are owned by a finance title. 50% of them are owned are owned by HR. Like, let's focus on an HR executive. So you're kind of using I'm sure someone will automate what I'm describing eventually. I'm happy to talk to people about it, but no one's done it yet. So for now, it's an agency. Just as a side note, I think that's a very good business model. Is software with a service. SaaS is effectively not a moat, right? I want to answer Josh's question. If an expert rep can evaluate 10K 10K in 10 minutes, doesn't that leave room for the AI to do in 2 minutes? Yes, So the AI may get less detailed. The real value of this, Josh, is if your team comes up with a 10K prompt that works really, really well for your business, you can then, like, the real value of AI is massive scale of playbooks, right? Instead of saying, hey, it takes 10 hours to train someone how to read a 10K, you can say, okay, everyone, we figured out this prompt framework really well. Every time before you're on a sales call, copy paste the prompt template in, and in 2 minutes, everyone on the team has good intel before calls. And so an entire enterprise sales team in 2 minutes. So it's actually you may not get the full thing. It's also, though, that it takes 2 minutes for everyone, and eventually you can automate that. I don't think anyone has the tools. I mean, you could kind of do that with Clay, but yeah. So that's kind of the other half of it, is your scalings.
Yeah.
Answering the playbook question, for us, once we do the customer analysis, we go into ICP and personas. And for me, the persona messaging, this is the part that no AI company is solving for. Like, if you're talking to an HR executive in restaurants with 500 employees, what do they need to hear that's going to get them on a call? What's their top priority? What would they say is the most important thing in their day right now? If you don't know what that is, you're not going to be able to book meetings. My view is AI personalization, all that stuff, I think it's really important for enterprise, but in a sense, that's almost the cherry on top. The first thing that I want to solve is, like, who actually buys from you? What actually do they need to hear to take a meeting? And then turn that into a good sequence, build out predefined personalization frameworks, and then equip sellers with that. Or we might do it at scale and just, stack it
Yeah,
on.
it's interesting. It's interesting because we also talked about frameworks in our previous webinar with Keith and Hamish, and it was very, very interesting, like how AI can now help you move away from templates and really work on frameworks, because frameworks needs a lot of intelligence and data that is now possible to do using AI. So to basically make this more exciting, and I don't see any questions here, but if any one of you want to jump up and maybe share your thoughts on this, I see Victor, Grace, Satvik. Any one of you? Victor, would you like to jump in and talk about your experience with this, or Grace?
I think big picture, a lot of what y'all say makes sense. Like, I'm embarrassed to say a little bit, but sometimes it's like going back to those fundamentals, all those things you learned in like sales school and all those kind of things. I think part of it's a discipline thing. I think people have gotten, like, quote unquote lazier just because things have gotten so quote unquote easy now. But a lot of it's just going back to the fundamentals and figuring out what works and making it repeatable.
I would definitely agree with that, Victor. So for me, I am at the place where I'm not totally ignoring, but AI is not a significant focus of my process building right now. Like, because the thing is, like, you don't need personalization to get replies on an email. Like, if you can have, as far as interested replies, as far as somebody who wants to take a meeting, you can get, I mean, we've gotten 0.5%, 1% replies per email, interested replies. So if you email 1,000 people, that's like 10 meetings just once, which beats a lot of sales teams. And to me, that's really a function of the am I saying the things this prospect needs to hear? What objections do they have? Am I making this seem like an easier and more certain and faster way to get to their own job to be done versus an alternative? And if you aren't, then you're going to be in a difficult question. Austin, so the difference between a template and a framework, a template, it's really kind of the degree of customization. Like, a template is, it's probably 80 or 90% scripted. A framework, it's sort of like you can derive a template from a framework, or you could turn a template into a framework. And so, for instance, in a lot of email sequences, what happens is you have, 10, 20% of the email that's personalized. right? And maybe not even that, maybe closer to 5, and which, by the way, is a significant contributor to whether it's going to be marked to spam. So with a template, you're keeping most of the words the same. With a framework, for instance, I think this is where I think AvaBot is a really interesting case right now. Let's say that you are selling to SDR managers, and your SDR managers in general care about, they want, let's say for your persona, you either want to sell on, they want the ability to coach reps better, they want to be able to ramp reps up faster, and they're just looking to increase overall booked meetings across the team. Well, with a template, you would be forced to pick from one of those value propositions. But with a framework, and this is something I think AvaBot is a good case study for, is you can pick a value proposition. You can have all 3 of those value propositions in like a persona setting. But based on the signal and some of the customer situation, AI or you can fill out, hey, they're hiring an SDR and they're mentioning quota attainment, or they're hiring sales enablement and they're mentioning call coaching as part of that, or a sales manager mentioned call coaching. So it's kind of like frameworks are more flexible. It describes a flow, but not the exact words for that flow. And the template describes most of the exact words.
Yeah. For example, Keith, who was there in our last webinar, he has an interesting framework called PSA, which is problem, shift, and answer. So again, like problem, shift, and answer cannot be a template, right? Because the templates are more like in curly brackets, you just replace some words with something else. And then you think that the other person reading it would actually think that you wrote this because they can see some customized fields. But in reality, everyone knows that it's a template, right? But when you actually use a framework and send an email, it's very hard to figure out, because problem means you actually are talking about their problem, which they are facing. Shift, you're talking about a shift that their industry is facing, and that's a main challenge. And then you come to answer, which is specific to the problem that they are facing. Now, if you have to implement this framework at scale, you will not be able to do that. Like, you have to actually write each email one by one. And that is where AI can really help, because it can pull in a lot of this intelligence from raw data that it has, and it can then help you write more emails than you can, with your hands, and help you send out those emails that doesn't look like templatized. So that's the major difference. Yeah.